everyone. I'm James Ladd, and I'm currently working at Tickbox. Some people know me as that small talk guy. So does anyone here know what small talk is? All right, you can have a stick on. Another one there. Any others would like a sticker? They're good stickers.
I know what it is. I don't know how to use it.
Yeah, all right, there are small talks. All right, so I'd like to take you on a journey that hopefully will make your development lives easier. And there's a bit of history there, there's a bit of suspense, a bit of drama, and hopefully some of that's included here as well. So a long time ago when I started developing, this was a user interface. This is what it looked like, and lots of people use these every day. This is a screen from the 3270 terminal, and things were very simple then. Typically, you would process that screen by printing the text on the page, waiting very simply for one field of keyboard input, and then processing that field, which usually meant printing another page of text and doing the process again. So that was really quite simple and easy and straightforward. Not much else you could do. Select a couple of numbers from the menu, maybe key in a few fields. It was very straightforward. Then there's more slightly modern UI. Okay, it's not the most modern you're ever going to see, but you get the drift. It's now graphical. It's a graphical user interface, and this is Windows 95. I could have chosen some others, but I didn't want to get too pizzazzy too quickly. Now, obviously, that was a little bit harder to write for, and we're talking about native apps here, not browser-based. And the handling for that particular UI was a little bit more involved. Each element of the UI had its own component, and that component would wait for some sort of callback from some sort of event, and then you would handle that event. And of course, you'd have to coordinate a lot of those events and marry all those little things together and do some processing. Then we decided that we'd get all web enabled. Incidentally, this is the original page for Amazon, and it looks quite different now because things are changing. But okay, we're just going to do something very simple here. We're going to print a screen or just draw the screen from the markup. We're going to wait for you to do some actions which your browser is going to take care of, typically clicking on a link and going to a new page, but that's it. Not very hard, easy. Then we wanted to get things a bit more advanced in the web space. Now I point out this slide not because we've got the little iPhone or iPad app in the middle, although that's what we are doing there. But around it, we've got another web app, which is actually helping you build the one inside it. So that's a tool called Proto.io. So we've gone from very simple web pages to something very advanced, which is building another app within a web page. And obviously, that's far more advanced when it comes to trying to make it work. We draw our component once again, we wait for a callback in JavaScript, and then we handle that event. And you might be thinking, hold on, didn't we just do that with the native application? Well, we did. It's somewhat of a circle. And everything old is new again. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it slightly different with a different set of tools. Now, if we go back to 1970, we have this user interface, which predates the one I showed you first, and it is the Smalltalk IDE. It's got multiple windows, they can size and resize, and okay, it's black and white, but everything was pretty much black and white back then. And this was all put together using models, views, and controllers to greatly simplify its ability to do what it needed to do without getting too complex for the developers to handle what was going on. So back then, 1978 I think was when MVC was first coined or put into action inside the IDE for Smalltalk. They created the MVC pattern, and this is a very, very important pattern. And here, I'm describing the three components, the view, the controller, and the model. Essentially, a view will trigger actions to a controller. The controller will then decide what to do with those actions, and it may or may not update the model, which in turn will then broadcast a change, and anybody observing that model will do what they need to do. Now, just like the circle in the development, going from fairly primitive interfaces to very complex ones, I'll circle back to this later on. So when you started to do your first web app, you probably just whipped up some HTML. Hopefully this is large enough for everybody to see. Very simple, straight markup. I've got some awesome content, and if you click here, I'll take you to it. Then, what we wanted, or rather what the designers and marketing wanted, was something a bit more flash. When somebody went over that particular link, they wanted to show a tooltip or do something else. So we thought, no problem, we'll just go in there and we'll just add it right now. Just type some JavaScript, we all know that. We'll do that in there. And that works. But then they wanted something a bit more. And because they want mouse overs or they want tooltips everywhere, we start to reuse our code. So we start to put the script function on the top of our page. And that works out fine when you have one page. But when you start to have 100 pages, or even differently, you start to generate 100 pages, then that doesn't work out so well. So then you think, that's okay, I can solve that problem. I will pull these libraries in from my server, because that's where they are, and that's where the page came from, so that's not a problem at all. And that works out well too. I'm now reusing my functions, and I can add them wherever I need to on whatever pieces of events and other handlers I want on the elements on the page. And that works out pretty well. But what if the entire page is generated by code? Now, a lot of us are working on single web page apps. People want apps that look and feel like native desktop apps, and they might even want them to run across multiple devices. And typically what they're doing is more than just showing a bit of content and then jumping between it. They're more complicated than blogs. They're more complicated than just simple brochureware. You know, we're building whole apps that build other apps. We're doing things that need to pull up maps and show where people are traveling and, you know, where the best bars are, what the best coffee is, and when to get the next order for some new album. So these things are becoming a lot more complex. Now, modifying the HTML and putting scripts in there, whether they be tags, that's a big problem. If I have 10 pages or 100 pages and I've got a piece of, you know, I've got a function being called and there's a problem in that function, who calls it? How many of my pages could be stuffed up by this function that's not working? I might change it in one place, but there's 3 others that I need to go and look at as well, because finding out where pieces of code is being called and where they're being called from is disconnected. We need to go through and have a look. There's also poor abstraction when you do that. I've said on this event, call this tooltip, and that works okay, but if you have to then process some other data, you're usually going to find that there are functions that are being handed data, and the two seem to be unrelated, loosely coupled, but not loosely coupled in a way that helps you, loosely coupled in a way that you don't know what's going on. There's also strong coupling between that piece of markup and the events that you're tracking on it. And that's great until, again, marketing or the designers come along and say, let's change this around a bit. And you go, but hold on, I just got all my callbacks beautifully sorted out. Now you're changing my markup, what are you going to do? In fact, somebody pointed out to me the other day that it was from 2006 onwards that most of the web community decided that mixing code and markup was a bad idea. And I tend to agree with them. So mixing these concerns will increase complexity. And when it increases complexity, it's harder for you to understand what a new project's doing if you're new to that project. It's hard for you to work out what's going on when there's a bug. And essentially, being able to do your job becomes more about inspecting where things are happening and how they're happening, rather than just saying, I understand this just by being told what it's about, and the code speaks to me easily, and I know where to go and change things. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to think that you changed a bug over in, you know, fixed a function over in A, and it broke something in B. And you might say, but hold on, I've got tests for that. That's true, but the quality of your test comes into play then. But I won't go down that track just now because it certainly suits my slides better if I don't. So, how do you keep the concerns separate and reduce the complexity of the code? So you can solve that complexity problem with Maria. I have to ask Peter McCow why he called it Maria. I really don't know. So if you're going to put your hand up to ask that question later, I'm sorry, I'll have to find out for you. But it's an MVC framework. Maria is an MVC framework just for JavaScript applications. If you want to do lots and lots of pages of HTML that's just info, then it's probably not the tool for you, although I would use it for that. But if you're going to build a single web page app, something that's very rich, something that's very active and responsive, then I would certainly use it for that. Now, it is real MVC. The original pattern from the original implementation has actually been ported to JavaScript. It's not a reification or a rethinking of MVC. It has controllers. We don't just throw them away because in some cases we don't need them. And the thing about Maria is that it was just that, MVC. No more, no less, just MVC. It's not trying to be a templating engine. It's not trying to be, all these other things, a dependency injection framework or this or that. It's just MVC. Again, it's a direct port of the Smalltalk MVC pattern. That pattern has been, like I said, around since 1978. And if you're familiar with Gang of Four and other patterns that have come out since then, they really are just a set of existing patterns that you'd know in another form. It's just using a particular arrangement makes it MVC. So your views are obviously observers. They look at a model, and when the model changes, it says, oh, I better redraw the screen, or I better go and update this on the screen. There's a strategy pattern. So when I click something on the screen, that event is raised and captured by the view, and then you ask the controller, hey, well, you don't ask, you actually tell it, sorry. You say, this has happened, what do you want to do? And it implements a strategy that says, well, in this case, I'm going to do this, and in this other case, I'm going to do that. And typically, it will involve going to the model and updating something. Now, I've chosen the model at the top and said composite, but technically, every other object can be a composite. A view contains subviews, a controller can contain subcontrollers, or you can use inheritance to implement that, but composition is something I would advise. Certainly when you start to mix in the state pattern. There's no reason a view can't observe a model which actually has another model, and you can just swap them around. So when you use Maria, it gives you a place for everything, and that really helps. Now, some of you may have developed with Rails, some of you may have developed with other frameworks that use convention over configuration, and Maria is very much like that. So when you look at the examples that are online, and they're well documented, and they're well thought out examples, you can find the source is partitioned as I show here on the screen. Controllers are in a controllers folder, models are in a model folder, templates are in a template folder, and guess where views are? So this really helps because when you have a new developer and you say, we use MVC and we use Maria, and this is where the stuff is, well, they've probably got a large chunk of your project straight away. And that really helps by having that convention over configuration. If there's an error and it happens in the something view, guess where they're going to look? If there's an error and the stack trace shows that it's somewhere in the controller, where are they going to look? That makes it very easy. It's not a piece of markup that is failing and they've got to go and look for generators and all that sort of stuff. It's very clear where things are happening and how it's happening. So I'll give you a quick tour of how this usually fits together. So usually you'll have an application. You'll start off by essentially having an index.html. Browsers like to have those so that they know where to start. And you will essentially pull in the things you need with the script tags, pull in Maria, and then basically generate your app. So yes, you will be writing script tags for all these different JS files that represent your model, your view, and your controller, but really it's not much of a chore. And you usually only write it once. If you're using a framework, say like Ruby on Rails, then all the JS stuff will be happening automatically anyway because of the way the asset pipeline works, and all that stuff is really, use some simple Unix command or just use some of the frameworks out there that will package it together for you, but you really don't need to worry about it very much. So when the application page loads, the first thing it's going to do is tell something that it's loaded, and it'll call this Maria callback, and here it will create the model that represents the application and a view that represents the application, put them together and tell them just to draw themselves. What that means is that the app view will render the app model and will essentially change some of the DOM elements. according to whatever you've asked it to do. Models. Models are very simple. They contain, I hate to say it, getters and setters. So I hate to say that because I actually think you shouldn't have any getters and setters at all, but that's another presentation. What you may notice straight away from the 2 slides I've shown you already with code is that Maria is a PODSO, plain old JavaScript objects. You know what they are. There's nothing special. There's no pre-compilation, post-compilation, or interpolation. It's just straightforward JavaScript. And most people should be able to follow this. This is the model, so you just define the properties that you're after, and then getters and setters, or business, other methods. So controllers work the same way. Again, it's just a straight object, and it has methods in it. Now, Maria will come in and do nice things with convention over configuration. So if I have a to-do view, it will automatically hook it up with a to-do controller and look for a to-do model. And so piecing those things together just happens through convention. So I might also point out here that we've got like on key press and on mouse over root functions, and that's only because when I get to the view I can talk back to these. So these methods will be called in response to events that have been raised on the view. When I look at the view, we have 2 particular sections here that are of interest in the view: actions. So I can simply say when this semantic item on the HTML has this particular thing happen, like a mouse over, or a click, or a key up, then I want you to call this method on mouse over, on click. And that will be called on the controller. Not on the view, on the controller. Because the view will tell the controller that something has happened so that it can implement a strategy for doing what you need to do. That strategy might be simple, like, hey, I'm not logged in yet, therefore I'm going to throw you to some login dialog. Or you are logged in, therefore I'm going to do this work. But your view should have no issues with that. It should not know about that. Hence why it's a strategy. Now, templates. As I said, Maria isn't a templating tool, and the quick and the those with the good eyesight will notice that this is a string with markup in it. And before you go, ooh, I hate that, let me point out that, again, Maria has I guess a Unix or a Linux philosophy of doing something simple and doing it very well. And right now, the problem it wanted to solve was being an MVC framework, as small and as succinct as possible and as true to the pattern as possible, not being a templating framework. And while I've written 2 apps that are in production using Maria, I've used this method and I've had no problems with it. However, you can of course put script elements within your HTML that you can then refer to as the templates. So if you want to use a different tool or whatever, you've got both those ways to look at it. And if you go again to the documentation that's provided, you can see how that works. So by using Maria, it is a simple and straightforward focused framework. It's very easy to pick up, very easy to understand. There's lots of documentation in the code. There's also lots of documentation on the website. And there's lots of good examples that are like you would be implementing anyway. You can extend it using standard JavaScript. So out of the box, it doesn't provide anything like Backbone to talk back to your server. But you can use the standard prototype extension mechanisms of JavaScript to add that yourself. That's really quite straightforward. So there's a plugin scheme available for Maria that will grow over time, that will allow you to download different pieces of code to augment or add functionality to Maria. And that's very easy to do. Again, it's standard everyday JavaScript. So it gives you everything you need out of the box. You don't need to go and get third-party libraries. We do choose, in my use, in our use for Maria, we do choose to use jQuery as well. So when particular events happen, or the controller says to the view, I want you to go and do this, we do use jQuery to manipulate those elements. because that's outside of being MVC. Just there, to be clear. It also keeps the concerns separated. So the markup doesn't contain code. The view is just about being a view. A model is just about containing state and data, and a controller is about implementing strategy between those two things. And it usually makes it very easy to work out what's doing what. So I guess a quick example, you may have an app view and an app model and an app controller, and that's your application. And you might say, but I don't have that data model on the server. That's not relevant. That's the model that you're using to represent your app as it's running in the browser. And it can communicate to your server, calling whatever API you want to have, and pull data from there, and then create other views, other controllers, and other models as necessary. The data contained on your server may be slightly different when you bring it into a Maria MVC app. That's because you may adorn it with additional data that's necessary to contain state that is relevant to the app. I just thought I'd point it out because there's a usual, I guess, misconception that the data on the server, like your customer record, needs to be exactly the same data when it goes to the client. It does, but the thing that turns it from JSON into a JavaScript object can at that time add additional attributes that are irrelevant to the server, but certainly help making your views and controllers work on the client side. I'm really just trying to give you a quick overview of Maria and let you know how easy it is to use and how much easier it is to develop with. I can go into a deep dive at another time. So, in Maria, which is currently version 1, and as I mentioned, I've got 2 applications in production using it. Coming in version 1 is 1.1 is a debug build. And that's pretty good because it will augment the things that Maria is doing for you with what events are being sent to where and whether your view is looking for a controller and the controller doesn't exist. So little mistakes you might be able to make, it will pop up and tell you what they are and hopefully ease that debugging time. It won't swallow your exceptions and make it harder for you to work. It'll show them to you straight away. And of course, try and give you pointers as to what might be a problem coming up. So it is a simple MVC framework. I've found that my development is a lot simpler. I find that I can have a view and then a whole section of that view might make sense to be rolled up into its own little view object, and I can reuse it elsewhere like a toolbar or some other widget, and it makes it very easy for that, and then it's easy to just take those parts of those controllers or those models and move them to the side. So refactoring and things like that are a lot easier. I don't mix code inside my markup, which means I can be a lot more semantic about my markup. I have the do thing action. Now, whether that's part of clicking on a div, or whether that's part of clicking on a button, or whether it's none of those, it doesn't matter to the view. It knows something clicked on, and it needs to give that action to the controller. And that gives me the freedom to be able to update things more quickly without looking for the things that break everywhere. Again, because it's just plain old JavaScript objects, you could just test them using anything. You don't have all these other dependencies to stack up. You can just mop them out as you would using, say, Jasmine, and you just test these plain old JavaScript objects very simply and easily. You don't have this framework of pre and post compilation and interpolation to worry about. It's just a plain object. Stub it out, make a mock, easy. Again, it's got great doco and great examples. There's more coming from Peter, and I recommend you have a look at the code as well, because I think he's a very fine developer, and the code he's written is very, very smart, and it's very, I guess the thing I like most about it is it's very singular in purpose, and therefore it's very clean. It's very easy to use. And that's Maria in a nutshell, really. Not too technical, I guess, in the presentation, but it's more to get you stimulated to go and have a look at it, to download the examples and give it a try. It's very fast, it's very clean. I haven't found any bugs so far that have gone across multiple browsers. And I highly recommend you giving it a try. Any questions? Now's a very bad time to realise you didn't press record. Other questions? Oh, there's one. I've run out of stickers, sorry.
It's very similar to backbone. It's very similar to backbone. Like actually, if you just replace subclass with extend, pretty much everything is like exactly backbone. Is it copied from backbone, or how do you compare it with it?
Okay, so backbone isn't just MVC. It tries to do some syncing with the server for you. It tries to keep your models synced. Okay, that doesn't happen in Maria, which leaves you to choose the best of breed solution for your particular problem. Whereas most people I know who use Backbone have to change the server side to fit in with what Backbone expects. And that doesn't always fit in every case. Not every server side is RESTful or API driven the way that Backbone expects.
Yeah.
So there's a slight difference. There's not a lot of code to come to understand with Maria. Backbone has a certain way of doing things, and it's good. I find it simpler.
Could you go back to the slide where you did view and you had the UI events property?
There?
Yeah, that one.
Right.
Sorry, UI actions. So you've got the UI actions object, and the keys are basically an event type, and then the object that it operates on. How is that implemented?
Well, when this object is extending the subclass, the superclass will take care of looking for that particular property, and it will iterate over the elements. And if it's a dot, it's going to be a class. If it's a hash, it's
Yeah. So
an
does
ID.
does it have a dependency on jQuery or?
No, it doesn't.
So
No, it doesn't. Everything you need out of the box is there. You don't need to go download other libraries and include them. It has that.
so
It
it
has a
uses
very
raw
small.
JavaScript to do that.
Correct. It has a very small library in there for looking at a couple of DOM elements. That's why I said that between all the browsers I've looked at so far, and that's quite a lot of them, including all the IE stack, I haven't found any errors with that.
Yeah, the other thing is, let's say you want to do that dynamically, so rather than at the view level define, hey, I want to have these actions, can I do a similar thing through Maria somewhere inside one of the methods?
Right there.
Oh, okay.
So I'm saying this find that element, and then I'm going to change the property on it.
Yep. Okay,
So you can manipulate the DOM.
Yep.
Here, there's this very small slither of a library to let you do that. In the stuff I've done, I've ended up turning to jQuery for that. So you get that choice.
Yep.
And it's part of this library, the aristocrat stuff that it's used. So here we're adding or removing
Okay, so
a class
that's
to an element.
a DOM manipulation that you're doing right there.
Correct.
How about event listeners that would bind into Maria's event listeners?
Right,
Can you do
so
that as well?
yes you can.
Yep.
So you can add an event listener to any object, and you can also listen for events on any object. Whenever the model is updated, this update function is always called. So there's certain entry points that always happen. My model's changed, therefore the update gets called. But I can also dispatch my own events too, which is also very handy, and it takes care of bubbling those all up. So if I have a list of elements and an element in that container throws an event, it will go to the container, and then the container can choose to bubble it up or not. And in fact, most of the time you're just saying listen for an event, and it takes care of it. In fact, there's a stanza that's very much like UI actions called model actions, and whenever the event name happens, it will tell the controller something else. So there's a shorthand for it, but that just calls the longhand that you can see quite clearly in the code. It's a very short space to show all of the code, but the examples do that. They will add listeners, they'll remove listeners, they'll do different actions, and they'll do some very dynamic things in a single web page app.
With regard to the DOM selectors you've got there, because you're not using jQuery, do you lose some of the more advanced selectors that you get with jQuery?
So again, it's a simple Unix philosophy. I do one thing well out of the box. In my case, and possibly in yours, I've included jQuery as well because I find the full gamut of things I wanted to do. Like I'm not going to find a library that's going to fade an element in or fade it out. Right? That doesn't come with Maria. But you're free to choose the one you want. It doesn't clash with Maria, and I think that's the important point. So I can add that in there. And that's what I'm doing. But if you've got something super simple, and there's enough there to show you that this is useful, more advanced stuff, choose the, whatever DOM manipulation library is your favorite.
Do you find that because it's so simple, developers can also shoot themselves in the foot, putting things in the wrong space? And
Oh, I hope so. I think that's an important distinction. It is just JavaScript. It's set out in a very simple way to meet the pattern. But that means that extending it is as simple as changing certain prototypes or doing mix-ins however you want to do them. And one of the first things I did was between Maria and the stuff I did, I created a seam object. So I would always say my models extends Maria models, and then I would make sure all of mine extended those. And that seam allowed me either to add a method between Maria and me, because I needed it within the hierarchy, or I could mix stuff into that level. But that would always give me an arm's length between the base Maria code and what I was doing. So if there was another version, I could just slot it in and not worry about it. But it doesn't dictate what I do.
so those, you had a slide about the folder locations,
Mm-hmm.
and if you didn't put, say, models or in the models folder and controllers in the controllers folder, would it yell or just
Arbitrary, doesn't matter, right? So if we go back to here with index.html, so here we're saying the source is JS Bootstrap, right? You'll find yourself going JS/controllers, whatever.
Right.
You can put it wherever you want, it doesn't matter. It's a suggested convention, it doesn't load things automatically for you. It's not what it's trying to do. What it will do is say that if I have the con view, then it will look for a con model, and it will look for a con controller.
Sure. It's all registered.
That's it, right. It will look within the namespace. Everything's namespaced, you're not going to clash with Maria, everything's Maria dot. And you follow, it's good practice to follow that same convention with what you're doing. Just find a namespace first, and put everything else in that.
So you're responsible then for updating the model. It doesn't do any two-way binding. So if the user changes data in the field, you've got to update the model.
Correct. So there will be some event that is communicated to the view, like in this case with this view, where we have a UI action here of a key up in an input field, and that tells the on key up input. That's called inside of the controller. This is on key press input, but same deal, and it makes a choice of what to do. In this case, it's saying unless it's a return, I don't care about what you're what you're doing just yet. But when it is a return, i.e. you've entered in that input field, I care about putting it in the model. So here it tells the model, down here actually, it gets the model and it sets the content. But it also, again, this is the strategy and the business logic here that says, if the value you've just typed isn't blank, I will put it in the model, otherwise I won't. When it's put in the model goes, hey, I've changed, and it fires a change event, and all the views that are looking at that model update. So it's quite common to have many different views of the same data. Now think of it as some data points, and I've got a pie chart, a bar chart, and a scatter graph. And when I change the data, they all just start to change. And that's because they're observing the changes, they're not being told to redraw. But yes, you do have to do that. But you can also reuse lots of those little components. So if you find you're doing a toolbar a lot across multiple apps, or you're finding you've got a certain sort of file dialog widget, well, you can create those views and the controllers behind that and reuse them across projects.
So with the MVC framework, I think one thing I was kind of looking for is whether it had a router.
No, it does not.
Right. So how would you build would you be able to use Maria to build a single page app, for example?
All of the apps I've built so far are single page apps. Again, we have a toolbar component, it gets an event, it knows what that event is, and then that child will say something to the controller like, hey, someone wants to view the XYZ document. Create that view, tell it to render the data, and
Yeah, so you're basically, you've got like a sort of a content div, which you will just replace the contents of and you just say view, select your view and then render into that content view, for example.
Well, you don't have to do that. Maria will do that for you. What I haven't shown here in the view is there's a method that you have called getRootElement. So your view knows about the template, and that's where you give it the ID or the class of the div, and it will go, oh, any children you've given me or the template that you've defined, I'm going to draw into the content of that div.
Okay,
So it'll do that part for you. It will render the if you just want to render HTML in a certain place on the page, it will just do that.
yeah. So so there's no place where you define at this hash URL or something or history API URL. I will render this view. There's no mapping. Of
No, no, there isn't.
Okay.
So so there's a deep linking challenge there for a user?
There is, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
That's fair
Now,
enough.
is that a really
Yeah.
good module to mix into, Maria?
Yeah.
Sure. I guess it depends what
Yeah.
your app needs.
Yeah.
We're going to face that challenge soon, but it'll be all right.
So no more questions?
Thank you very much. So if anyone would like to know more about it, please just get in contact with me. And if anyone's crazy enough to want to know about Smalltalk, then I'm happy to tell you about it as well.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks very much. And yeah, we'll update for next week, next month, and hopefully we'll be more organised about location. But thanks again for